The door that opened the year I turned 26. My own mother told me I was not her responsibility anymore. My husband had been gone 11 days. I was standing on her porch with two sleeping one-year-olds in the back seat of my car, asking for 3 weeks and a couch. She looked at me the way people look at an unexpected bill. Inconvenient, unwelcome, someone else's problem. I will tell you exactly what she said. But first, hold her face in your mind. Because 8 years later, that same face would go completely still on my own land, in front of 300 people, waiting for something that was never going to come. None of them saw it coming. Not my mother. Not my father. Not my brother. They believed the story ended the night that porch light went dark. This begins in the cold. It ends with $100 million and a single sentence that emptied a room. The night everything collapsed, Daniel died on a Tuesday in October, pinned under a tractor that rolled on a slope he had graded 100 times before. He was 28 years old. I was 26. Our twins, Caleb and Hannah, had just learned to clap. The hospital called at 4:11 in the afternoon. I remember the exact time because I was warming bottles and the microwave still had 11 seconds on the clock when I picked up. They asked if I could come in. They never say why on the phone. They never do. I drove 40 minutes with my hands at 10 and 2 and my mind perfectly, terribly empty. I signed 3 forms at a counter and my signature came out steady, which felt like its own kind of betrayal. A nurse asked if there was someone I could call. I said yes. I lied. The truth was I had a lease ending in 19 days for $100 in my checking account and a life insurance policy Daniel had kept meaning to set up and never got around to. We were young and ranch poor and completely certain we had time. People our age always believe they have time. That night I sat on the kitchen floor between 2 cribs and did the math out loud because saying numbers out loud kept me from saying anything worse. Rent, daycare, the truck payment, diapers in 2 sizes. I counted twice and got the same answer both times. The answer was no. I had 2 doors left to knock on. I tried the wrong one first. The porch my parents lived 90 minutes east in a brick house with a seasonal wreath on the front door. I had grown up in that house being useful. My younger brother Travis got the soccer fees and the new cleats. I got the part-time job and the speech about responsibility. I told myself that made me the strong one. I drove there with the twins because I had nowhere else to go. My mother Linda opened the door in her good cardigan and did not step aside. I asked for 3 weeks, a couch, a corner, anything, just until the insurance situation sorted itself and I could breathe again. My father Gary hovered in the hallway behind her and studied his shoes. Travis cracked his bedroom door, saw it was me, and shut it again. My mother folded her arms across that cardigan and told me the family was stretched thin, that 2 babies was a considerable burden, that I was an adult now, and adults handle their own situations. Then she said the thing I would carry for 8 years. We can't be your safety net, Bethany. One of the babies stirred in the car. The porch light buzzed. I said okay because what else do you say? I carried 2 car seats back down the steps while my mother watched from behind the screen door. Somewhere between the second step and the truck, the light clicked off, as if even the house had finished with me. I did not cry until I reached the county line. Then I called the only other number I had. I called Ruth Sinclair, Daniel's mother, not to ask for anything. Asking had just cost me the last of something I couldn't name, but simply to tell her I was struggling. That was all. Ruth listened for maybe 20 seconds. Then she asked where I was. I told her the gas station off Route 9. She said, "Don't move." 7 words. 40 minutes later, Walt Sinclair's truck pulled in beside mine, headlights washing over 2 sleeping babies. The old man climbed out without a single word and started transferring car seats with the calm efficiency of someone who had decided what needed doing and was simply doing it. Ruth came around the passenger side carrying a blue quilt stitched with white stars, the one she had made when the twins were born, and wrapped Caleb and then Hannah in it right there under the fluorescent station lights. Then she pressed something warm into my hands. A chipped casserole dish the color of a marigold, foil over the top, still hot, as though she had grabbed it straight off the stove on her way out the door. I started to say I couldn't accept it. I didn't want to be a burden. Ruth cut me off the way only a genuinely kind woman can, gently and completely. She looked at Walt and said, "Set 2 more plates. They're ours now." 7 words in a gas station parking lot. No conditions. No speech about adults handling their own situations. Just 7 words. I followed their taillights 40 miles out to a struggling little horse operation in Cedar Hollow, Texas. I did not know it yet, but I had just met my real family for the first time. What I brought with me to the Sinclair place was 80 acres of good intentions and difficult luck, a barn that needed a roof, a fence line that needed everything, and a mortgage Walt did not discuss in front of company. They put the twins in Daniel's old room and me across the hall. For the first week, I mostly stared at the ceiling and listened to horses move in the dark. Here is the part nobody at my mother's house had ever bothered to learn about me. I had a degree in equine science, earned across 6 years of night classes and double shifts at a veterinary clinic, paid for entirely by myself. I understood bloodlines. I understood conformation. I knew the difference between a horse that was sound and a horse that simply had not broken down yet. On day 9, when Walt walked me out to look at the stock, I stopped cold at a stall in the back. There was a bay mare in there, 4 years old, with a left front leg that turned in just slightly at the knee. Walt said she was going to the sale on Saturday. Nobody wanted a crooked-legged mare. He could not afford to feed what he could not sell. I stood at that stall for a long time. Everyone who had looked at her had seen a liability. I watched her move 3 steps across the straw and saw something else entirely. The way that turned-in leg let her load and push off a fraction faster than any straight-legged horse ever could. I asked Walt to give me until spring. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. Then he looked at the mare. Then he nodded. Her name was Juniper. She was the first thing I had chosen in 11 days. Fear wearing a nicer coat. I want to be honest about who I was in that period because it is not a flattering picture and I am finished pretending otherwise. I was not brave. I was terrified. And I turned that terror into work because work was the only language I trusted. I took every available job within driving distance. I broke young horses for neighbors at dawn, drove a feed route at midday, and came home to clean stalls and read genetics papers until my eyes stopped focusing. Walt offered me a wage from the operation, and I refused it for 4 months because owing the Sinclairs anything felt like a debt I could not survive defaulting on a second time. Ruth started leaving plates outside my door because I had stopped sitting at the table. One night Walt found me asleep on my feet in the wash rack, the hose still running. He turned the water off and said quietly, "Beth, nobody's keeping score out here." I did not believe him that I had spent my entire life believing love came with an invoice attached, and you cannot unlearn that in a single season. The bank had given the Sinclairs 18 months before the foreclosure conversation would begin. I knew that number the way I knew my own pulse. So I slept 4 hours and got up and did it again. It took me years to understand that working yourself hollow is not always discipline. Sometimes it is simply fear, wearing a more respectable coat. But fear aimed in the right direction can build something. And I had a crooked-legged mare and a barn full of nothing, and I was about to find out exactly what it could build. The green ribbon, it took 14 months to bring Juniper along. I did not fight that leg. I built around it, conditioning her to use what she had rather than apologize for it. By the following spring, she could stop on a dime and roll back faster than horses worth 10 times her original sale price. I entered her in a small reigning futurity 2 counties over. The kind with folding chairs and a concession stand that sold only hot dogs and coffee. I expected nothing. I needed proof for the bank and for myself. Juniper drew an early slot. When she ran her pattern, that turned-in leg let her sink into the ground on her stops as though she were pouring herself into it. We placed 3rd out of 41. 3rd. I stood in the dirt holding a green ribbon worth almost nothing, and I felt the first solid ground under my feet in over a year. But the detail that mattered more than the ribbon was this. An older woman in the 2nd row of the bleachers had been writing in a leather notebook throughout the entire class. When Juniper made her final stop, the woman stopped writing and simply watched. Afterward, she found me at the trailer and asked one question. Where did I find that mare's bloodline? I told her I had built it from a horse headed to the slaughter pen. She studied me for a moment, the same way Walt had studied Juniper, and then handed me a card and said she would be in touch. The card read, Vivian Hargrove. I had no idea who she was. I was about to find out, and it would change the size of everything I thought I was allowed to want. Twice a year, my parents called twice annually with the regularity of a bill nobody could cancel. That December, the phone rang on Christmas morning while the twins were tearing into secondhand gifts Ruth had wrapped in newspaper and ribbon. It was my mother. The call lasted 4 minutes. She spent the first 3 talking about Travis, his new fitness franchise, how it was going to be enormous, how proud they were, how he had always had vision. Then she remembered I was on the line and asked how I was getting along out there at the in-laws. I said the children were healthy and I had placed a horse at a futurity. There was a pause, the particular kind that tells you the person on the other end is checking the time. Well, that's nice, she said, and asked how the twins were doing. She could not come up with their names. Not one. She called them the babies. My children were nearly 2 years old, and my own mother called them the babies because she had never once asked what they were named. I said Caleb and Hannah like a correction. She said, of course, Travis needs the phone, happy holidays, and the line went dead. I stood in the doorway watching Hannah press a bow onto Caleb's head while Ruth laughed from the kitchen. And I understood something with a clarity that did not even hurt anymore. My parents remembered me twice a year, and they had never once asked the names of the only grandchildren they had. I hung up and went to set the table, and I added 2 extra plates without being asked because in that house that was simply what you did. Vivian Hargrove was not, it turned out, a pleasant older woman who enjoyed horses. She was a reputation, 40 years in performance horse breeding, a name that opened gates from Texas to Kentucky, and a portfolio she had built and then largely sold off after her husband passed. She arrived at the Sinclair place that February in a truck worth more than the barn. She walked the fence line with Walt, then asked to watch Juniper move. She observed for 10 full minutes without speaking. Then she turned to me and said, "You read that leg correctly," which most people with credentials after their name would have missed. "I want to know what else you can see." I told her the truth. I believed Juniper's line could produce an entire generation of horses that moved the way she did. The trait was heritable. The market would pay for it if I could prove it across multiple offspring. Vivian asked how much capital it would take to find out. I had run those numbers 100 times in the dark, so I gave her the figure without hesitating. She did not hesitate either. She said she had watched a great deal of genuine talent stay buried under difficult circumstances, and she had no patience left for watching it stay there. Then she said the words I had spent my whole life bracing against. "Let me invest in you." And the thing I am not proud of is that my first instinct was no, because I had learned what people meant when they offered to help. I had learned it on a porch in October. So I did not say yes. I said I would need to see the terms in writing, every line of them. Vivian Hargrove smiled like I had just passed a test. The document that became a wall. I hired a lawyer with money I did not have, a careful woman named Pat who charged me in installments and earned every dollar. We spent 3 weeks on the agreement with Vivian, and I read every clause out loud until the language stopped being foreign and became something I could actually stand on. Vivian would fund the breeding program. In return, she would hold a clearly defined minority stake with a clean buyout path if either party ever wanted out. But the clause I fought hardest for, the one Pat said most people in my position never think to protect, was the bloodline itself. The genetics, the breeding rights, the records, the future of Juniper's line. All of it I kept structured separately and entirely under my control. Vivian could have pushed back. Many investors would have. Instead, she read my terms, looked up over her glasses, and said, "You're going to do just fine, aren't you?" I did not fully understand yet why it mattered so deeply to own the thing itself, and not merely a share of the money it generated. I think part of me was still standing on that porch, still hearing my mother calculate my worth. I had decided somewhere in my bones that I would never again be in a position where someone else held the document that determined the direction of my life. The people who love you sign clearly. The people who use you sign in fog. Vivian signed clearly, in blue ink, on a Tuesday. I signed beneath her. And when Pat slid the completed copies into a folder, something clicked in my chest, the sound of a foundation setting.
I did not know it then.
But I had just built the wall my entire family would one day break themselves against. What the line became the first Juniper offspring hit the ground in spring. A leggy bay colt who stood up uncertain and then moved exactly right. I knew within a week he had it, that low-loading hindquarter, that hunger to stop. I named the program after the creek running the back of the property and bred carefully. 3 maras the first year, then 6, matching Juniper's line to outside blood that complemented the trait rather than canceling it. By the time that first colt was a 2-year-old, buyers who had never returned my messages before were calling regularly. He sold at auction for a number that made Walt sit down on an overturned bucket and stay there a while. The money came slowly at first and then not slowly. We fixed the barn roof. We paid the bank ahead of schedule. And the foreclosure conversation that had lived in my chest like a second heartbeat simply stopped. One Sunday that fall, I served lunch to the ranch hands off the back of a flatbed, ladling stew from a chipped marigold casserole dish, the same dish Ruth had pressed into my hands at a gas station 2 years before. She caught me using it and said nothing. She just smiled and looked away. I had gone from the woman being fed in a parking lot to the woman doing the feeding out of the same worn dish. Word spread past the county and then past the state. People began saying the name of the program before they said mine, which was exactly how I wanted it. 90 minutes east, in a brick house with a seasonal wreath on the door, a phone was about to start ringing in the opposite direction. The Thursday call my mother called on a Thursday in March. Not Christmas. Not my birthday. An ordinary Thursday, which told me immediately that something had shifted. Her voice was different. Warmer. Rounded at the edges in a way I had not heard since I was small and useful. She asked how I was, and then actually waited for the answer, which she had never once done. She used the program's name correctly, which meant she had heard it somewhere, which meant it had traveled. She asked about Caleb and Hannah by name, and the names came out a half-second slow, as though she had rehearsed them in the driveway before dialing. I stood in the tack room holding the phone, and felt the strangest thing. Not warmth. Not relief. A cold, clean alertness, the kind you get when a horse you trust suddenly pins its ears. I asked evenly how she had heard about the ranch. She said, "Oh, you know how people talk, that my father had seen something, that maybe she could bring the family by some time, that life was short, and that she had seen something online about a young woman and horses doing very well for herself. It had just made her think of me." I said I would see. I got off the phone and stood in that tack room for a long while, turning one question over like a stone in my hand. Why now? I did not have the answer yet. In about a month, it would arrive in my inbox by accident. The email Travis called next because of course he did. The fitness franchise had not been enormous. It had in fact closed 2 locations and was bleeding from a third, though I would only learn the specifics later. What I received that day was the charm offensive. My brother turning it on the way he had at every family dinner throughout our childhood. The easy laugh, the "we've got to catch up," the "I've been meaning to call." He talked for 10 minutes before arriving at the actual point. And when he did, he wrapped it so carefully, I almost missed the shape of it. He needed a bridge loan. Just until the next location stabilized. He hated to ask, but family helps family. He had heard I was doing well with the horses. He said a number. It was not a small number. I let the silence sit the way I had learned to with a young horse, not pushing, just letting the pressure speak for itself. Then I said calmly, "Travis, I help people who showed up. You weren't there." He laughed, uncertain, and asked what that was supposed to mean. I told him exactly what it meant. I told him I had stood on our parents' porch with 2 babies and an empty bank account, and he had opened his bedroom door, seen me, and closed it again. He said he did not remember it that way. I said I did, and I had remembered it that way every single day for a year. He went quiet, then cold. He said I had always been dramatic. That family was supposed to forgive. I said, forgiveness and a loan are 2 different transactions. I wished him luck, and meant it, and hung up. The answer to why now arrived on a Tuesday, dressed as nothing. Travis forwarded me an email by mistake. He had intended to send it to my mother. Underneath his new message sat the entire thread, Scrolling back 6 years, the way email does when nobody trims it. I almost deleted it. Then I saw my own name. I scrolled. There it was. A conversation between my mother, my father, and my brother from the spring after Daniel died. My mother had written that taking me in would have been throwing good resources after bad, that I had made my choices marrying a man with nothing, that some people were simply a poor investment. My father had replied in agreement, adding that they needed to think about Travis's future. And then the line that hollowed me out and refilled me with something considerably harder. My mother had written, "We keep it civil. We don't burn the bridge completely because you never know. If the ranch ever amounts to something, we'll want the door cracked. We'll want the door cracked." They had not forgotten me through carelessness. They had filed me away on purpose. An asset marked down, a position held in case it ever appreciated. The warm phone calls were not a change of heart. They were a quarterly review. I read it 3 times standing in the kitchen. I waited for the wave of rage. It did not come. What came instead was something colder and far more useful.
Clarity.
I printed it. Not for a lawyer. Not for a confrontation. I printed it so I would never again confuse what they were doing with love. The only plan that beats an image, I want to tell you, I plotted something elaborate that night. I did not. I am not built for schemes. And schemes have a way of corrupting the people who run them. What I did instead was simpler and I think considerably harder. I decided I would not give them a single hour of my anger. I would not call my mother and read the email back to her. I would not let Travis pull me into a fight he understood far better than I did. I would do the one thing my entire family had never expected me to be capable of, then or since. I would outbuild them. I would make something so solid, so completely and cleanly mine, that when the day came that they reached for it, their hands would close on air. That was the entire plan.
Build. Document. Wait.
By then, Juniper was 9. A proven producer, the foundation of a line that buyers across 3 states wanted access to. I walked out to her stall that night and stood in the dark the way I had on day 9. Except now the barn had a new roof and the bank was paid and 2 children were asleep in a house that was warm. I scratched that crooked-legged mare under the jaw and thought about doors. The ones that close on you, the ones that open, and the ones you learn to build yourself, with hinges only you control. The performance you would think people who had written off a widow in an email thread would at least have the decency to stay away. Mine did the opposite. As the program's name grew, my family discovered a sudden and very public devotion to me. The first time I witnessed it clearly, I was at a major futurity, the kind with real bleachers and a live stream, and my mother and Travis appeared uninvited, found me at the trailer, and transformed into an entirely different version of themselves the moment a camera swung in our direction. My mother hugged me for the photographer from the regional horse magazine, her hand spread across my back, as though she were presenting me to the room. Travis told a reporter, loudly enough to carry, that the family had always believed in me, that they had sacrificed so I could chase this dream. I stood in their performance like a fence post they were leaning against for the photograph, and I understood exactly what they were constructing because it was the mirror image of what I was constructing. I was assembling documents in a lawyer's office.
Quiet.
Unwitnessed.
Airtight.
They were assembling a story.
Loud.
Witnessed. Photographed. The story of a devoted family who had stood by their daughter through difficult times so that no one watching would ever question why they deserved a piece of what she had built. They dealt in images. They always had. My mother could hold a room's belief for the length of a photograph, so I let them have their pictures. I smiled the appropriate amount, and I filed the moment away because I had already decided how this would end. They would build their image in public, and when the day came, I would answer it the only way that defeats an image, with the truth, out loud, in front of everyone they had ever wanted to impress. My father, there was one moment, just one, that nearly broke through everything. It was my father. He found me alone at the back of the trailer area after the photographs, away from my mother, and stood there working his hat in his hands the way he did when he could not find a comfortable place for himself. His eyes were red. He said he thought about that night often. He said he had sat in the truck at midnight with the keys in his hand. That he should have driven to me. He said it twice. I should have driven to you. For one suspended second I was 12 years old again, wanting so much to believe my father would have come. Then I asked him the only question that mattered. Dad, that was 8 years ago. Where are you standing now?
He looked at the ground.
The silence stretched. And in that silence I received my answer more clearly than any words could have delivered it. Because if he were standing with me, he would have said so. Instead, he spoke about things being complicated, about my mother, about not wanting to choose sides. He had 8 years. He had a confession most of the way up his throat. And he still could not take one step out of her shadow. I did not hate him. That is the strange part. I simply saw him, finally, all the way down to the bottom. A man who felt the right thing, and would never once do it. The offer came when Caleb and Hannah were 9, and I was 34. By then the program was no longer a ranch. It was a brand, a training facility, a waiting list of clients, and most importantly, the line. Juniper's descendants spread across the finest barns in the country, every one of them tracing back to a crooked-legged mare a man had nearly sent to the sale. A Western lifestyle company, the kind that owns competitions, clothing labels, and streaming productions, had been circling for a year. One afternoon, their representative sat across from me and Pat at my own kitchen table and slid a number across the wood. $100 million. For the land, the facility, the brand, and they were very clear, the genetics, the breeding rights, and the future of the line. I sat with that number for a moment. I will be honest, because I promised I would be. It was not $100 million in cash. Most of it represented the value of the bloodline and the brand I had spent 8 years building, structured over time, with a portion tied to how the line performed in subsequent years. But the headline number was real, and the kind that ends up in a regional publication, then a national one. I asked for 2 weeks. They gave me 3. That night I walked out to Juniper's paddock, 12 years old now, retired from competition to a comfortable life, and leaned on the rail. Selling meant I would never again have to ask anyone on this earth for a place to sleep or a plate of food. Selling meant the door was finally, permanently mine. I already knew I would accept. The only question remaining was who I would open the door 4.3 structures. I knew what I wanted to do with the money before I finished signing the sale documents. And I built it the way I built everything, on paper, airtight with Pat. 3 structures. The first was an irrevocable trust for Caleb and Hannah, sealed so completely that no appeal, no legal challenge, no tearful holiday conversation could ever loosen a single dollar. They would be educated, secure, and free. No one would ever stand on a porch and price them out. The second was for Walt and Ruth. The deed to the original 80 acres and the farmhouse, signed back to them free and clear. Theirs permanently, along with a funded account that would carry them comfortably for the remainder of their lives, plus a meaningful stake in the sale proceeds. Not a gift wrapped in obligation. Simply theirs. When I told Ruth, she set down her dish towel and said, "You don't owe us a thing, honey." I said, "I know. That's exactly why." The third structure was the one that mattered most to me. The Daniel Sinclair Memorial Scholarship Foundation, funded for the long term to support young people entering equine science, with a specific preference written directly into the bylaws for applicants raising children on their own. I wrote that line myself. I had Pat read it back to me twice. Everything I did through documents because documents were the only language my family could not argue with. They dealt in feelings and photographs and the elastic memory of who did what to whom. I dealt in signatures. Witnessed. Notarized.
Filed.
By the time the sale was a month from closing, every meaningful dollar had been directed to the people who had shown up. And I had done it in a form that could not be undone. I had not yet told the people who hadn't shown up. They were about to find out the way they found out everything from a distance and too late. It leaked $100 million. Anything always leaks eventually. A regional business publication ran it first. Then the horse press. Then a national outlet picked up the angle they could not resist. The young widow who built a program from a mare headed to slaughter. My phone, quiet on the family front for years, came back to life like something possessed. My mother texted within 6 hours. "So proud of you. Always knew." Travis sent 3 messages, then 4. The final one was nothing but celebratory graphics, as though we had accomplished something together. My father called and left a voicemail saying he hoped we could all sit down as a family soon, that he loved me. I stood in the kitchen reading all of it, and I heard my mother's voice from 8 years before, as clearly as if she were standing beside me. "We can't be your safety net, Bethany." Except now they could see the size of the net I had woven from nothing while they watched from 90 minutes away. And every one of them was reaching for it. The woman who could not spare a couch was sliding into my messages with "so proud of you." The brother, who had shut his door, was sending me a parade through his phone. I did not reply to any of it. Not from cruelty, but because I had learned that silence is its own answer, and a perfectly clear one. They walked through the gate. I had planned the celebration on the ranch carefully. The horse community, the buyers' representatives, the neighbors who had hauled water during the dry year without sending a bill. Walt and Ruth as guests of honor, front and center. I had not invited my family. It had not occurred to me that I would need to make that explicit. I was about to learn that for certain people, an invitation is considered optional. Travis stopped asking and started informing. The charm disappeared, worn down to something raw beneath. He said the family deserved to be included. He used the word deserved. He listed contributions and sacrifices from a ledger he had kept privately and never once shown me. Then he said the thing that clarified everything. They would all be there for the... No question in his voice. He was not requesting an invitation. He was notifying me that they were coming, that a number would be discussed, and that objecting in front of my guests would make me look unreasonable. They had spent a year building the public story of the loving family who had stood beside me. Now they intended to collect on it, on my land, in front of my people, where refusing them would cost me the appearance of warmth. It was, I had to acknowledge, a well-constructed play. The only kind they knew. I told Travis I would see him at the event. He took that as agreement. It was not agreement. And I called Pat immediately and told her to ensure every last document was signed, witnessed, and recorded before the date of the celebration. Not after. Before. There would be nothing left to negotiate. I would make certain of it. The day the morning came up gold and still. By 11, the grounds were full. 300 people drifted across the property with coffee and lemonade, talking horses and weather, and the thing this woman had quietly built out here in the dirt. The long table under the tent held Ruth's stew, made in that same chipped marigold casserole dish, scaled to a much larger portion now, but ladled at the end from the original, because some things you do not replace simply because you finally can afford to. I wore a clean shirt and good boots and shook 100 hands. Vivian found me and squeezed my arm and said she knew I would do exactly this. I told her she was the only person who had ever bet on me with her own resources rather than her opinions. Walt and Ruth sat in the front row near the stage. Walt in a tie he clearly resented, Ruth with the twins on either side of her, Caleb fidgeting, Hannah solemn and proud. Everything was exactly as I had built it. I stepped toward the small wooden stage with my pages of notes I did not really need. I scanned the sunlit crowd one final time, every face belonging to someone who had had a hand in this. And that is when I saw them. My mother, my father, Travis, walking through the front gate, dressed for a photograph, moving through the edges of the crowd as though they owned the afternoon. Uninvited. Smiling. Right on time. My mother had on the good coat and a smile she could hold for an hour without it showing any strain. She was stopping to introduce herself to strangers as Beth's mother. You must be so impressed, we always knew. Travis had positioned himself near the cluster of press, the regional magazine, the live stream camera, and I watched him lean toward a reporter and say, just loud enough to carry, that the family had sacrificed everything to give me my start. That this was a story about what a family accomplishes when it stands together. My father trailed behind them both, hands in his pockets, eyes finding mine, and then sliding away. They were not there to celebrate. They were there to be seen celebrating. To plant themselves in the frame so that every photograph and every clip would show them at my side. The devoted family. The ones who were owed. My mother caught my eye across the crowd and lifted her hand in a small, confident wave. The wave of a woman entirely certain her seat was being saved. Several neighbors who had known the real story went quiet and still, the way a group goes quiet when something moves along the fence line that does not belong. Ruth's hand found Hannah's shoulder. Vivian raised one eyebrow at me. I gave the smallest shake of my head.
Not yet.
The sentence, I climbed the 2 steps onto the stage, and the crowd settled and turned, and my mother arranged her expression into something gracious and expectant, already preparing her face for the gratitude she was certain was arriving. I set my pages on the podium. I looked at the people I loved in the front row. And I began. I did not raise my voice. That was the entire point. The thing I had promised myself the night before on an overturned bucket in the dark. The louder something is, the easier it is to dismiss. So I started quietly, and the crowd leaned in to hear me, which meant that by the time I reached the part that mattered, 300 people were perfectly silent, leaning toward every word. I thanked them for being there. I told them the short version of the truth, that 8 years ago I had arrived in Cedar Hollow with 2 babies and nothing, and that the people who took me in had not asked what I could offer in return. They had simply set 2 more plates. I found Ruth's eyes in the front row. Then I said I had 2 gifts to give before anything else became official, and I wanted to give them in public because the right people deserve to be thanked in front of witnesses. First, the foundation. I nodded, and the banner unfurled behind me. The Daniel Sinclair Memorial Scholarship. My late husband's name 20 feet tall over my shoulder, funded to help young people into the work that had saved my life, with a stated preference for parents raising children on their own. The crowd made the warm, low sound that only happens when something genuinely lands. Then the second gift. I asked Walt and Ruth to stand. They rose, confused, Ruth pressing her hand to her chest, and I told the 300 people what I had told no one outside a lawyer's office. The deed to this land had already been signed back to Walt and Ruth Sinclair. Free and clear. Theirs permanently, along with everything they would need to never worry again. Because 8 years ago, they had given a stranger a home. And you cannot repay something like that. You can only try to match it. Ruth began to cry. Walt caught her elbow. The crowd rose to its feet and the applause moved across the grounds like a change in weather. In the front edge of that crowd, 3 faces did not move. My mother's smile was still in place, but it had stopped meaning anything. Fixed on a face that was rapidly understanding it had brought the wrong expression to the wrong occasion. Travis had gone pale. My father stood staring at the stage like a man watching a situation he had assumed would resolve differently. I let the applause settle. Then I looked directly at them.
Just the 3 of them.
And I said the only thing left to say, quietly, so the entire silent crowd could hear every word. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who showed up. The gate my mother found her voice first. And it was not the warm voice. It was the porch voice, 8 years older and twice as sharp, and it came out of her before she could stop it. How dare you, she said, loud enough now that heads turned. How dare you humiliate your family in front of all these people? And there it was. The inversion I had promised myself. The composed woman on the stage, and the loud one in the crowd. The exact reversal of a porch in October. Travis stepped forward attempting to recover the situation, saying something about legality, about family rights, about contributions, words with no weight behind them because there were no documents behind them, only a story they had told themselves and each other. The buyer's staff moved toward my family with the quiet, professional firmness of people who have done this before. My father said nothing at all. He simply looked at me, and for one final moment the confession from the trailer lot passed across his face, what he felt and would never act on. Then he looked at the ground where he always looked, and let himself be guided toward the gate. My mother's voice carried the whole way, after everything I did for you, after everything, growing smaller with the distance, until the gate closed, and the words stopped, and the grounds were simply my people again. 300 witnesses. And a silence that finally, completely belonged to me. What came after the celebration continued, because that is what celebrations do. Within 20 minutes, the crowd had folded back into music and food and the easy warmth of people who genuinely like each other. I slipped away from the tent for a few minutes because I needed to. I walked back to the porch and sat on the swing. Ruth came and sat beside me without a word. Someone had left the blue star quilt folded over the arm of the swing, soft and faded now, 8 years of washing thinning the cotton. Ruth pulled it across both our laps. Out past the rail, Juniper grazed in the golden evening light. Beside her, June, the young filly from Juniper's final cross, mirrored her down to the crooked leg. 2 ends of a line nobody had wanted to wager on but me. Caleb and Hannah ran across the grass toward us, breathless about something the way children always are, and piled onto the swing and under the quilt. For a moment there were 4 of us tangled in a faded blanket that had wrapped these same 2 babies in a parking lot once, when we had nothing. We did not have nothing anymore. But that had never really been the point. The short version of what happened to them, they hired a lawyer. The letter arrived a few weeks later filled with phrases like reasonable expectation and family contribution. Pat read it once, set it down, and said it had all the legal force of a wish. There was nothing to contest. The trust was irrevocable. The deed was recorded. The foundation was chartered. I had not built something they could dismantle. I had built something they could only stand outside of, which was exactly the intention, formed on a Tuesday morning with a printed email in my hand. The letter stopped. Travis's franchise closed for good eventually, the consequence of his own choices, and not $1 of mine. A tired, quiet part of me noted the symmetry. My father sent one final message months later. No apology in it, just a line that said my mother would never forgive this. As though that were news. As though it were my loss. I did not reply. What it looks like now, Walt and Ruth still live in the farmhouse on the 80 acres that are theirs. The funded account meant Ruth finally let Walt address his knee, and they took their first vacation in their entire marriage, a week on the coast. The foundation awarded its first scholarship the following autumn. I want you to know who received it because it is the part one am most proud of. A 24-year-old widow with a toddler, working nights, who wanted to study equine science and had been told by everyone around her that it was not realistic for someone in her situation. I read her application essay 3 times. I called Pat and told her to make sure that one went through, because 8 years earlier, a woman had knocked on the wrong door with 2 babies and been told she was a poor investment. I wanted to be the right door for someone else. I kept a smaller property after the sale, 20 acres down the road from Walt and Ruth, with a barn just the right size for what actually matters. I breed a handful of offspring each year from June, the filly with Juniper's leg, slowly and carefully, and because I love it, not because any bank is counting. Juniper still grazes by the live oak where the children can see her from the fence. Caleb wants to become a veterinarian. Hannah wants to run the foundation someday, and I believe she will. We eat dinner at a table with no empty seats and no hidden ledgers. Most nights it is nothing remarkable. Stew and homework and a dog sleeping under the table. That ordinary, unremarkable thing is the most valuable possession I own. It cost $100 million to understand it had been free all along. The only lesson that stuck, I spent the first half of my life believing I had to earn a seat at my own family's table, until 2 people I was not born to simply set one for me, asked nothing in return, and taught me the only thing that ever truly stayed with me. Love that keeps a ledger was never love. It was an invoice waiting to be sent. 1 closed door. 1 open kitchen. A crooked-legged horse nobody wanted but me. If someone showed up for you when your own blood would not, go tell them today. Do not wait for $100 million reason.